Hello and welcome to the European Parliament. I'm Jack Harvel with the EU Reporter, and I'm here with German MEP and Chair of the EU Delegation, David McAllister. Thanks for joining me today. First, I'd just like to ask what your general reaction is to the election of President Trump.
Well, the American people have decided, and Mr. Trump is the new president. And I think not only for the sake of the United States of America, but for the sake of the whole world, we hope that the United States will have a successful 45th US president.
And President Trump has praised independence movements like Brexit. How should the EU work to combat that while also maintaining the best possible relations with the United States?
Mr. Trump was one of the few international politicians who welcomed the outcome of the British referendum on the 23rd of June last year. I was personally quite confused that he did that because until now, close transatlantic cooperation and also the support for European integration was a key pillar of US foreign policy. The British are leaving the European Union. Mr. Trump believes that other countries could also leave the European Union. I don't think this is in the US interest that the European Union falls apart, because it's also important for the Americans that we have a strong and active family of nations in Europe, and we are, together with the Canadians, the closest friends and allies of the Americans.
And President Trump has also been very critical of NATO. He's even gone so far as to call it obsolete. Is there any truth to that? Does NATO need to be updated in any way?
NATO, the transatlantic cooperation, is the most important pillar of global security. And NATO is the most successful defense treaty and defense cooperation in the world. And we are thankful for what the Americans are doing for our security and defense in Europe. But it was the United States which triggered Article 5 NATO treaty for the first time after the 9/11 attacks, and at that time the Europeans were ready to support the Americans. So we can talk about modernizing NATO, but please let us not call NATO obsolete. No, it is a very, very important cooperation of friendly nations. We understand that the Americans expect us to do more for our own European defense and security. We understand that the Americans demand that all European members in NATO fulfill the 2% target for defense expenditure with regard to their GDP. So we will have to spend more on defense, but more important is the way we spend our money in Europe. That's why I'm very strongly in favor of closer cooperation on defense and security within European member states.
And President Trump has been much more sympathetic to Russia. Will that change the European Union strategy in any way?
Well, Mr. Trump has said a few positive things about Mr. Putin, who he believes is a strong leader, and he also views Moscow as a potential partner in combating ISIS. I believe that the West, the United States, the Canadians, the Europeans, the Japanese and others, we should remain in a clear position towards Russia. We are interested in having good, friendly relations with Russia. But Russia is responsible for the most serious violation of international law since 1945 in Europe, when they annexed Crimea in an illegal way. Russia is responsible for destabilizing other countries in Eastern Europe, like Moldova, like Georgia, just to name two others. Russia's policy towards Europe, towards the European Union, is an aggressive one, and I think it's important that we stick together, and sanctions aren't there for good. It's up to the Russians to fulfill the treaty, the agreement of Minsk, and when they start implementing what has been agreed in Minsk, then the sanctions can be lifted. So it's really up to the Russians to go the first steps.
And would President Trump's suggestion of moving an embassy to Jerusalem derail the two-state solution that has been pursued?
I was in Israel and Palestine in the first week of this year, and We spoke to many people about this issue, and of course we also heard some voices of support, but the huge majority of people I spoke to said a possible move would damage the prospects of a two-state solution, and our European objective is a two-state solution with an independent, democratic and viable Palestinian state existing side by side in peace and in security with Israel and its other neighbors. So moving the US Embassy to Jerusalem would cause a lot of problems, and therefore I don't believe this is a good thing to do.
The President has had some strong words on Islamic terror. Will the EU change its commitment at all, or is it already doing quite a bit or enough?
Well, Europeans and Americans are allies, and together we are fighting ISIS. Together we are doing military operations to dismantle this terror network. In general, it now remains to be seen what exactly the Trump administration will claim and enforce in the upcoming months and years. But Mr. Trump has been very outspoken when he spoke about erasing ISIS from the map. ISIS is a huge threat to our security, and that's why we should keep together, stay together, and operate jointly.
And just in general, Trump ran on the campaign of building a wall. Do you have any thoughts on the border wall between the United States and Mexico?
Well, that's an internal US-Mexican issue. I understand the concerns of American people that a lot of migrants are coming through Mexico and from Mexico to the United States. If a wall or a fence or whatever, if this is a solution to the problem or not, I find difficult to judge, because you're going to have to build a very, very long wall and a very, very long fence. This will cost huge amounts of money, and well, we Germans have our experiences with walls. Our history has shown building walls is the one thing, tearing down walls is an even better thing.
It's expected that Trump will move to block incoming refugees. Do you think that could exacerbate the refugee crisis here?
Well, most of the refugees which have come to Europe in the last 1.5 years from the Middle East and from Northern Africa, they didn't go to America. I mean, of course, the United States and Canada accepted numbers, but compared to what Germany and other countries did, that's very small. So I don't think that the refugee policy in this point will affect the migrant waves from the Middle East and Northern Africa to Europe. In general, I believe that we have a humanitarian responsibility for those who are in need. My policy in Europe is those who are fleeing from war, prosecution, from other terrible incidents, they have a right to find a new home place in our countries. But those who are coming for economic reasons, they will have to be returned. We in Europe can't take every migrant from Africa or the Middle East who wants to come. This just won't work.
Mr. McAllister, thanks so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.